coming, and thanks for coming to figure out how sororities and fraternities are like thermoses. We don't have a lot of time, and so I want to start with just a brief story about, one of the things about me is I suffer from pretty severe seasonal affective disorder. And pretty much as the days start getting shorter, life starts getting harder for me. And the hardest part of the year for me is from when daylight savings time ends, the first weekend in November, to the winter solstice, or about December 22nd. And so, among a ton of other things I do to get through that time, one of the things I do is the Saturday before the time change, so that's November 1st this year, I have a party, and I call it Stew Jam, and I invite all my friends to come and bring their best stew. Over the years, we've changed it to stew, soup, or chili. You can bring it, and we just get together, we eat comfy food, and just remind each other that the season is going to end soon, and that if we stick together, we'll be all right. One of the hard things about Stew Jam is that, last year I had 24 people come, so that's 24 different stews. And you got to be careful about how much stew you eat, because stew is pretty heavy, and if you go heavy on one, you're never going to make it to the 24th before you're done. And so, the trick is to take just a little serving of each one, and then you go back, and the ones you really like, you have a lot of them. And so that's what this talk is going to be like. There's a lot of great stuff about sororities and fraternities, and one of the things I hope you pick up on is just how much I love this kind of work. And ideally, maybe you'll love parts of it too. And so my card is on by the projector table. There is a sign-up sheet there. If anything here catches your eye, you want to learn more, we can go out to coffee, we'll go Dutch. If you want to be invited to Stew Jam, put your name down there too. So I'm starting my 6th school year in this position. When I started, I had no professional experience with sororities and fraternities, and I was never a member of a fraternity as an undergrad. So this was all brand new to me. And I think like a lot of people who are not affiliated or who are not members of sororities and fraternities, most of my information came from popular media. We got the classic Animal House, School Days, House Bunny, what Alicia Cuthbert's finest moment. And then I haven't seen this one yet, but that's part of my professional development, so we'll see Neighbors that came out this summer. And so none of these movies present sorority and fraternity life in a positive light. We're kind of focusing on alcohol, but if you read the newspaper or kind of follow the news, sororities and fraternities tend to make a lot of sort of unwise decisions and show up in the news for not very flattering things. And there is a lot of research to support that there are significant negative sides to being affiliated with a sorority and fraternity. And yet, there's other research that shows sororities and fraternity members are up to a lot of great things. Students who are affiliated with these organizations tend to be more successful and have a better time in college. And some very famous alums from who were members of the sorority and fraternity system: Sally Ride, first U.S. woman in space; of course, the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., Sandra Day O'Connor, first woman Supreme Court Justice, and Chuck Norris. So as I started this position, and over the years, the question's been, okay, so which is it, Joaquin? Which really is it? And, I get that question a lot. Okay, Joaquin, you have this wackadoodle job. What is it like? And so we're going to be talking about that question, answering this question on our way to addressing that whole thermos thing. And here comes the pop quiz part. Don't worry, none of you can fail it. So what do you think? What % of all undergraduates at UC Davis belong to a sorority or fraternity? And in this part, I'm going to be giving you some general information about the population that I work with and also my colleague Thomas Witcher works with. Anyone say A? Okay. B? All right. C? And D? All right. The answer is 11%, or about 2,700 undergrads. What that means is that anytime you have a class of 20 students, there's a 95% chance that one of them is going to be a sorority or fraternity student. Our sorority and fraternity members are in every college, in every academic major, so they really are everywhere. All right, how many recognized sororities and fraternities are there at UC Davis? Who thinks it's 31? All right. Oh, wait, okay. So I just realized the number is actually in the name of the talk. So we're just going to go straight to about 71, okay? Which surprised me when I first saw that. And you don't really, the impression that most people have is this about a dozen and a half or 2 dozen, but actually we have a very large number of groups here. And when I say recognize, I have that word in italics simply because sororities and fraternities exist as individual entities separate from the university. And so there are groups that meet our minimum requirements to be recognized by the university, and so they're here and they're operating, and Thomas and I help work with them. And then there are groups that, for whatever reason, operate in the area but don't meet our requirements or have no desire to meet our requirements to be recognized by the university, right? Yes? That's a great question. So the question is, I guess, basically, who are we including? And so the groups that we include as sororities and fraternities are groups that have a national headquarters. That's a sorority and fraternity headquarters. We also include groups that behave like sororities and fraternities, but may not actually call themselves a sorority or fraternity. So if they hold a rush or recruitment process, if they do things that sororities and fraternities do, we call them sororities and fraternities. We also include any organization that would like to be recognized as a sorority or fraternity as long as it meets our minimum requirements. So that, and we'll get there, that includes professional organizations, social organizations, cultural organizations. And when you compare all 9 of the UC campuses that have sororities and fraternities, I think Davis has the most liberal and open policy about who is a sorority or fraternity and who we work with. Thank you for that question. Oh, and we're getting to that part. So when we break down those 71 groups, 32 of them are all male, men only. About 31 are all women. The oldest women's organizations call themselves women's fraternities, and it was sort of in the mid or late 1900s. Feel free to check me on that. I don't know if that's correct. They started calling themselves sororities. So women's fraternities, sororities, all women organizations. And then we have 8 groups that are open to all genders. Okay. Very large range in size from fewer than 5 groups that are just starting on campus or who are struggling a little bit with their membership, all the way up to 130 and even larger size. And then we have groups that exist only at UC Davis. We have some groups that only exist that only have a handful of chapters at universities in California or in kind of the west part of the US. We have many groups that are all across the nation, and we have some groups as well that have started chapters in other areas. I should also mention that the sorority and fraternity movement is kind of a uniquely United Statesian sort of thing. The first fraternity showed up is almost as old as the country, around the late 1700s, but it's kind of uniquely US. And so we have 4 broad types of groups. Most people, when they think about a sorority or fraternity, they think about the social groups, the groups that have the houses on Russell Boulevard. Those are all social organizations, or primarily for the social aspect or the coming together aspect of being a sorority or fraternity. We have almost 3 dozen cultural or multicultural organizations that have a specific interest. We have a number of Latina interest organizations, a number of groups that define themselves as Asian interest, and then break down into South Asian interest, Filipino interest, Filipina interest. Then we go to the professional groups. We have groups, sororities and fraternities that focus engineering, agriculture, pre-med, pre-health, pre-law, things like that. And then 2 groups that focus specifically on community service. This is kind of a good representation. We have a man and a woman from a pre-medical organization, Delta Upsilon Mu. We have a number of women from Lambda Theta Alpha, which is a Latina interest sorority. Phi Beta Sigma here, 3 men from Phi Beta Sigma. It's historically African-American fraternity, as well as several of the social fraternities and sororities represented here. So that's kind of a good snapshot of the diversity and range of groups we have. And so one of the things that really struck me, and one of the things that makes working with sororities and fraternities so cool, is this part here. Independent of their main focus, they all kind of stress these things, brotherhood and sisterhood. And when we're talking lifelong, and that really surprised me, where you have folks who were fraternity or sorority members back when they were teenagers. They still get together in their 50s and 60s, and so this is this community here. They all stress academic achievement and community service, and also here, they're values-based organizations. And these aren't values like, well, we'll be positive and say they are very positive values, like, citizenship, community service spirit, and just, being a morally upstanding citizen, however that's defined. These 71 groups, we divide them into 6 every group at Davis needs to be a member of a governing council. And we have 6 governing councils. They're listed here. Asian Sorority and Fraternity Council, those are, as the name says, we have 8 groups in there. They tend to be smaller. Average size is about a dozen students. These next two, Davis Collegiate Panhellenic Association, is a group of 10 sororities, and these are the largest sororities, some of the oldest and largest women's organizations in the nation. They hold a joint recruitment in the fall, so during Welcome Week, when you see young women walking up and down Russell Boulevard going into the different chapter houses, that's them holding their recruitment. And then Interfraternity Council, these are the largest and oldest social fraternities on campus. They have a much broader range of numbers, going down from 5 to up to 80. I should say, back up, the Panhellenic Association, those 10 chapters represent about 1,200 women. So almost half of all sorority and fraternity members at Davis are members of these very large groups. The National Panhellenic Council is comprised of the Divine Nine, or the historically African American fraternities and sororities. At Davis, we have 3 represented right now. And their numbers are very small. I think their average chapter size is like 2 or 3 per chapter. So they're smaller, but working on increasing their numbers. The professional groups, about a dozen. Their average size is on the order of 2 dozen people. United Sorority and Fraternity Council, this is a collection of cultural and multicultural groups. Again, a large number of groups, but their average size is only about a dozen. And so that's a trend you see, where the cultural organizations, culturally focused organizations, tend to be smaller than the social groups. Okay, so what are these folks up to? What do you think? In 2013-14, how much money did these 71 groups raise, and how much voluntary community service did they do? The answer is D. That's a lot of money. I would put these groups toe-to-toe with any other type of student organization and see what numbers they get up to. Delta is the biggest fundraiser every year. They hold a letter writing drive to benefit St. Jude's. They average about $15,000 a year they raise through writing letters. Okay, GPA stuff. Any guesses? Boom! Okay, and here's why it's complicated. And this is some of the most interesting stuff for me for my job. So, spring 2014. The higher numbers are in red. So when we look at all undergraduates compared to all sorority and fraternity members, we see that the undergraduate quarter GPA is slightly higher. The sorority and fraternity cumulative GPA is slightly higher. And that flip-flops everyone. So they take turns who's higher. But that's only part of the picture. So here you could say, yeah, it's kind of higher. This is a little complicated, but this is kind of when we break it down. So you can see here those 2 original numbers. But then you can see that, all campus men is below average, and fraternity men are even below that. And then when we look at the sorority women and all women, those numbers too tend to flip-flop a little, and this is quarterly GPA. So we have this huge range of diversity, and you see Sigma Alpha Epsilon Pi, Jewish interest sorority. They were the group featured in Sorority Life, MTV put on in 2000. This is astronomical GPA, 3.35. I don't know of many other student groups that are that good. And then, also we have groups that are really struggling. So there's a huge range in diversity. And then when we break it down by council, it's even more fascinating. So we have the social sororities just knocking it out of the park, the professional groups doing well above the average, and then we look at the council that's primarily men, and then we look at the 3 councils that are primarily comprised of cultural organizations, and we see them struggling here academically. So then we get back down to this. Which one is it? And actually here, it's potentially both. And that's kind of the potential part is where we get to this question about how these groups are like thermoses. Because everyone knows you have a thermos, right? And the thermos is probably the best invention known to humankind. Because it keeps the hot stuff hot, and it keeps the cold stuff cold. But how does it know whether to keep it hot or keep it cold? Right? And the answer is it doesn't. It just takes what it has and extends it longer. So whether it's a good idea, let's have a fundraiser, or whether it's a not so good idea, let's have a rager. If you give it to a sorority or fraternity, they make it, they magnify it. And so this is it. I mean, do their size organizations strong bonds? Well, you can read that there. So this disproportionately large positive and negative impact is kind of what fascinates me about working with these groups. Because really, college life, the definition of college life is kind of living this unbalanced life, right? You don't need to be in a sorority or fraternity to make bad decisions surrounding alcohol or a bunch of other things. And you don't need to be in a sorority or fraternity to be an outstanding student, okay? But if you are in a sorority or fraternity by virtue of the organization, you can do a lot of damage. But at the same time, when we look at here, like the president of Delta Delta Delta, women's fraternity here on campus, she is the student in charge of a 130-student organization with an operating budget of almost $250,000, plus in charge of a property that is worth upwards of almost $1 million. And she runs an annual fundraiser that raises $15,000 a year. Right? That's what our sorority and fraternity leaders can do, and that's the potential that they have. And I would put that toe-to-toe. Maybe some of the ASU CD officers and maybe the picnic day director have that kind of responsibility. But certainly these organizations do. And so that's my job, and that's my colleague Thomas's job, is to just move students from these kinds of actions to this in a nutshell. And two, I want to, we've talked about all these things, and Thomas and Shika did this great risk management program earlier today. But also, this is very important, especially for the cultural organizations. It's one of the most common refrains we hear from students who join cultural organization is that, I was ready to leave UC Davis, or I was just not fitting in at UC Davis until I found my brothers and sisters. And that's what they say, I found my brothers and sisters, and I decided to stay because here are people who knew what I was going through. So that's what I get to do every day. And this is too, because they're values-based organizations, and their values are not, let's have big wild parties, it's like, let's be upstanding citizens. That provides for us the foundation for positive change. Like, okay, so tell me how this is consistent with your values, and let's try to change this. Like, do you really want to have a male beauty pageant? Tell me how that kind of fits with what you say and you're paying dues to do, and let's kind of move you in that direction. And this is another cool, really great thing that's just happening. These numbers came out at the end of the spring quarter. Less than 24 hours after these numbers came out, the president of this council called me and said, dude, Joaquin, let's do something about this. Okay, and so this is not, and then by himself, he put together the State of the Union address to all of the presidents in this council. It's like, hey, this is not who we are, this is not consistent with our values. Let's get together and do something about it. At the end of September, we're getting together all the presidents out of this council. We're meeting with some folks from the Asian studies and talking about why this is like this and what we can do to change. And that all gets back to the fact that there are these values-based organizations. Just my last couple slides talking about this. So this is the team. Richard Ronquillo is our Assistant Director of Student Housing, is our supervisor. And together with Alicia, Thomas and I work and put together, do these kinds of things. The presentation is going to be available to you, and also there are my business cards there. If you have any sorority or fraternity related questions, we're the folks to come to. And then also, so in addition to us, the four of us, we work with representatives that come to campus, representatives of the organizations that come to campus to help us keep these groups headed in the right direction. We work with local alumni who are in the area who serve as advisors for the groups. But a lot of our work, because it's just really two of us against 2,700 of them, we do a lot of work with campus partnerships and working with different organizations on campus because, again, sororities and fraternities are everywhere and they get up to everything. And so I can't think of the last time I did something that was just us and not with somebody else. And these are great people to work with. Just the idea that nobody is born Greek. And so every single person in this organization, especially the leaders, have made the decision that I'm going to do more and be more than just a college student. And working with these folks is, it's pretty awesome. And so they're always looking for help. If you're interested, if you'd like to just get involved somehow and just say, hey, or just learn more about the organization, I encourage you to put your name down and pick up one of my cards. And again, we'll go for coffee, but we'll go Dutch. We're on Facebook. Here's our website. And again, these will be available to everyone, so you'll have our contact information there. I think we have 1 or 2 minutes, so I'm happy to open up the floor to questions. I know we got to do this thing here. So Here, go ahead.
So I was just wondering, I don't know that much about what you guys do. What is your interaction with students? Is it just with the presidents? Do students in sororities, fraternities come and see you individually for advice? Like, how is that relationship?
I would say most of the time we work with the leaders of the organizations. Occasionally, individual students will come in with questions. We also do a lot of work with community members on town and gown sorts of things. But if you're talking about students, it's primarily leaders of the organizations and leaders of the councils.
Thanks.
Okay.
If you were to go to college again, would you join a fraternity? Yes, no, and why, or why not?
If I were to go to college again, and I knew what I know now, I would consider joining a fraternity if I could do my homework and figure out if it was a fraternity that did the stuff on the right side rather than the left side. I think it would also depend on the number of sorority and fraternity, the size and impact of the sorority and fraternity community. I get another flavor of that question from parents all the time. And what I tell them is, we have strong ones and not so strong ones. Here's all the information we put out about, what to look for. Here are questions you can ask your child, and here are some, positives and negatives to look for. So, thank you for that question. Yeah. We'll do that one, and then we'll go over across the aisle.
I'm wondering, from your experience, do you have, if you were to advise a student about, say, whether or not, for some of the ones that have houses, whether or not they should live in the house or not, what would your advice to a student who's asking that question be?
My advice to so at Davis, the houses are very small. So the average occupancy is only about 12 students. At some other campuses, they can hold a couple hundred and hold the whole chapter. I think because the students, if it were just a general student who was not an officer, I would advise them to not live in the chapter house. If they had a strong GPA and were also a leader in the chapter, I think those would be indicators that, consider living there, because when the leaders are together, the whole organization does better. Okay. I think we have two across the aisle. Thank you.
Okay, so you said if you could do it all over again and you could do your research on which ones to join, you would.
Yeah.
So aside from just kind of word of mouth for our students, how do they determine? How do they get that real information?
Well, on the website, we list the GPA and the standing of all of our sororities and fraternities. They're all listed from highest to lowest. We're more than happy to talk to individual students. Probably, especially this time of year, I talk to parents all the time and occasional students. Thomas has.
I'd say I am the other half. The other piece of advice to the students is really talking about fit.
Yeah.
The group that they connect with, and if they're really interested in joining about the values, if they're interested in leadership or the academics or the service fees, ask the chapters to show you those numbers. If they can't show you those numbers and they can't give you the actions that they've done tied to those values, then you may want to consider rethink your decision. But a lot of it comes down to personality and fit. Where do they feel most at home? And what's really going to help them make it through graduation and into being active?
Okay. We got one. Oh, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
First of all, thank you. This was really informative to me because I've
Okay.
always purposely avoided this because I have my own stereotypes.
Okay.
And you,
okay.
you
We all
showed
do.
them, you
We
put
all
them
do.
up there visually. So those were all my stereotypes. There
Okay,
you go,
yeah,
especially
okay.
the Belushi one, right?
Yeah.
But part of not school days, right? But part of my reservation comes from the fact that I always have lumped sororities and fraternities as part of this monocultural kind of animal that I've never really understood, and it's very easy to not appreciate it and denigrate it.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, to what extent do certain groups, because when I think of fraternities and sororities, I think white, upper middle class. That's the thing that comes to mind to me. Of course, I know it's not that way here. You clearly just showed that to us. But for those established groups that have been around for a while and actually are part of the power structure in this country and continue to be, and that's, in my mind, what some fraternities and sororities continue to do. How self-aware are they, I'm curious to find out, of that monoculture and historical power structure? Very, very deep question at the end, but I wanted to throw it out there.
That's a good question. I'll start answering it, and maybe we can do that coffee thing and talk about it. I think, and that's kind of a conundrum, because these are self-selecting I don't know the terms, but they purposefully say, we're going to hang out with dudes. This is going to be all dudes. So they're self-segregating. But one of the kind of neat things about that is that even though they're self-segregating, they do recognize and kind of pay attention to the differences among themselves. Something that we are working very strongly on is to get, well, the councils, the groups tend to be very self-segregated. Like the social groups tend to work together. The cultural groups tend to work together. One of the things we're trying to do is get them to see their common ground and kind of all work together. And so part of that's the direction we're trying to move them into as kind of a brief answer. And then Thomas, did you have?
I'd say the other part of it is we've done this a lot, particularly with our culturally based organizations, is reframing their focus instead of just being a student organization. How are you a tool for recruitment and retention of students?
Yeah.
How are you, being able, now that we're starting to have some of that data, is we're able to start doing that benchmarking. It's like, okay, where's our retention, our graduation rate data as a community in comparison to the average student population? And we can break that down by some of our other student communities. So for us, it's really reframing that conversation. And as Joaquin talked about, breaking down those barriers. Because that, as the title says, it is very easy for them to come in and insulate themselves as an organization.
Ooh, good analogy. Yeah.
And so to kind of break down those barriers, and for us, is we set up our systems in ways where we kind of force them to interact, and they realize that, like, while my letters and colors are different, and the colors of our skin may be different, like, our processes are very much similar, we just do it a different way. So, for us, it's getting the students to see how they are different, but yet they're still very similar in what they do.
Okay. We are a little over time, so I'm going to have to end it right there. I'll be outside for any questions. We have business cards, and again, StuJam 2014, or questions about sorority fraternity life, please sign the legal pad. Thank you so much.